All right, so let's start. If we go on, thank you, Marta. So over the past year, almost, the Efus Working Group on Security and Innovation started exploring the opportunities and the risks of using AI technologies or some AI technologies in urban security. We organized a session on predictive policing as well as a session on facial recognition. And we heard from a number of experts, but also from cities about their perceptions, their initiatives, and their challenges. The session on predictive policing was organized in the framework of the Cutting Crime Impact Project, or CCI. The objective of this project is to enable police and relevant local and national authorities to reduce the impact of crime and, where possible, to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And so the partners of this project are developing toolkits for their local law enforcement agencies or other security actors to improve their approaches in 4 different focus areas. These are community policing, crime prevention through urban design and planning, measuring and mitigating citizens' feelings of insecurity, and predictive policing. And so on the next slide, you will see predictive policing or the crime prediction or the use of crime prediction softwares is the statistical prediction of individuals or environments that have an increased probability of criminal activity. It is based on the collection and analysis of massive amounts of data about previous crimes. And so in Europe, there's really a focus on geospatial data. So this is about places of property crime or places of violent crime, not so much about person-based data that is used to predict individuals that are supposedly at risk of being involved in criminal activity. So in this framework, the partners of the project conducted extensive research not only into the state of the art of the approach, but also the ethical, legal, and social implications, which you can see on the next slide. And there are quite a few, and you can read up the fact sheets that we have circulated before as well. To just mention some of them, when it comes to data selection, there is, for example, the risk of using historic crime data that might result in automated decisions that reinforce inherent bias and discrimination. The fact that algorithms are trained on this massive amount of data makes transparency tricky and understanding where a decision comes from. That impacts the correction of wrong decisions and also the ability of judicial reviews. Some conclusions of this session that we had, as well as the research that was done, is that, in fact, it is open whether predictive policing is effective. And the partners of the project that worked on this found that it was actually more a gain for internal management in rethinking the way that they use data and rethinking the way that they are sharing information amongst each other. A few months after the session on predictive policing, we organized a web conference on facial recognition. And you will be able to see on the next slide that we also developed a fact sheet on this topic. And when doing the research and talking to some cities that were doing this, they pointed out the opportunities, notably when it comes to the search for missing people, in particular children, of course, the identification and tracking of criminals in the framework of potential terrorist threats. Of course, however, the risks, the legal, social, and ethical implications of facial recognition in public spaces are manifold. And so there is, first of all, the impact on fundamental rights. The way that people use and behave in public spaces has an impact on the freedom of assembly and of association, freedom of expression also, if people don't feel comfortable going to manifestations, for example. There's, of course, the right to non-discrimination. A lot of studies have shown that the error rate depends quite a lot on gender and on skin color. There's also not a lot of research on how facial recognition works, for example, for differently abled people. Then there's the whole question of data protection, the right to privacy. When we think about the origin of the data that is used to train an algorithm, who collected it, for what purpose, and from where? And if it is collected for one purpose, can it be used for another? Was there bias in the collection? So these are just some of the reflections that came about in these prior sessions that we had. And so before I will give the floor to our speakers who will elaborate on this actually a little bit more, I just want to briefly mention on the next slide the new AI package by the European Commission. When we were talking to cities during these sessions and when writing the fact sheets, we identified some recurring challenges. Those were, for example, the need for adequate training of law enforcement officers or other security personnel, other people on the local level that are working with algorithms on a technical side, but also in terms of ethical issues. And another recurring challenge was the need for a clear legal and regulatory framework. And so this is something that the EU Commission started working on and published as I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. On the next slide, you can see that in this proposal for a regulatory framework, the EU Commission outlines a number of requirements for high-risk AI uses, which include predictive policing and facial recognition. This includes the use of high-quality data sets, the establishment of appropriate documentation to ensure traceability, but also sharing information with the user. And so our 2 speakers of today will talk a little more about how some of these requirements might be put into place and whether they can outweigh some of the risks that I put forward in the introduction. Of course, the 2 applications that I mentioned might not be used by that many cities, whether that is for financial reasons or simply because they don't necessitate them. So an additional element of today's presentation will touch upon use cases that go beyond the purely security or surveillance related applications. Jana Degrott is a member of the City Council of Steinzel, a small city in Luxembourg, and a young elected politician in the European Committee of the Regions. She'll talk a little bit about the experiences or perceptions in Luxembourg about AI, the risks and opportunities of automated decision-making at the municipal level, and the risks for discrimination. After that, we'll hear from Linda van der Fliert, who works for the Chief Technology Office of the City of Amsterdam, who work together with Dutch and European governments towards a responsible use of technology. And so she will tell us a little bit about what the City of Amsterdam does and why there is a need for more public control of AI. So now, without any further delay, I want to give the floor to Jana and ask you to answer elements for the following question.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. So first, thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. It's a super important topic, also a topic I'm doing my research on at university. So glad that I'm here. So AI has been with us for decades. In recent years, this technology has developed, and algorithmic decision-making and other types of AIs are advancing rapidly and are used in so many sectors, including in our public administrations.
Is it just me, or I think there's a little technical problem.
Do you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay, wait a
All
sec.
right, let's try again.
Okay, let's maybe. So you hear me now, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I was saying thank you that you invited me, because it's a topic that that I'm doing also my research on. So I'm not just interested in it because I'm a politician, but also because I'm really passionate about the topic. So as I said, AI, and as you said, Pauline, is being used in so many different sectors in our society, and also in our public administrations. And robots have already replaced humans and civil servants. But this technology has also created new challenges. For example, for the protection of our personal data, but also for the protection of our fundamental rights. And this is also one of the reasons why the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, was adopted in 2016 with the aim to mitigate these risks. I don't really want to repeat too much of what Pauline says, because I think that what you have seen in the previous conferences is interesting, and you also came to the conclusions that I would draw. But I want to talk to you today about the hypothesis of administrative decision making by a machine learning system. When a robot civil servant, in the context of a public administrative act of individual scope, it will be obliged to justify it, to justify why it took this specific decision. And let's put it in different words. If someone comes to me as a politician and says, Jana, I want to build this little house in front of my house, and it asks me to give them a building permit, and I refuse for different reasons. I need to justify legally why I refused to give this permit. Now, if we let an AI system take this decision, what happens then? And in practice, this would mean that the developers of AI system would have to integrate into their computer codes a function that allows to preserve a record of the operations that led them to take this specific decision. And here it's absolutely fundamental and essential that the various steps and the reasoning of this AI systems then says, yes, you're allowed to have this building permit or you are not, is well documented. And here there's what does well documented mean, right? Well documented means that a Lambda citizen, so a citizen that has no background in IT, understands why this system took this specific decision. And so in Belgium, for example, they already start really talking about e-governments, and they really have civil servants that are robots. In Luxembourg, we are not there yet. It's funny because I reached out to many mayors in Luxembourg, and also to organizations that represent the cities here in Luxembourg, and I talked and I asked these questions, and so many were not able to answer, or were not even knowing what I was talking about. And I see this as problematic for two reasons. First, it shows that we leave these issues in the hands of experts, basically the ones that have studied the topic, and we just say we don't understand, so we leave it there. Second, we don't understand, so we are not open to chat to face the challenges that are coming, right? And especially because I'm also a person of color and a woman, I'm particularly concerned about the fact that if we don't fix the bias in our society, we will just automate it. And therefore, I think that it's crucial that we have these discussions. And I'm actually glad that I'm talking today to you, because I realized because of this that so much needs to happen in Luxembourg. And so, yeah, definitely. Here now, a last word on the new AI regulation. I just want to give a little disclaimer. I didn't write it, so I can't. What I'm saying is just based on what I read and based on my experience. I want to give you my opinion on it. So if we read the 100 pages of the new AI regulation, the proposal made by the Commission recently ago, we realized that the European approach to trustworthy AI follows a risk-based approach. But then the question is, who defines the risk? Who are the people that say this is a problem? And by reading the proposal, you see that the people that decide on this are mainly the people from the big industries. And we know who sits on top positions in big industries. It's often not people belonging to minority groups, and also no women. While the Commission's effort is to be welcomed, I'm really concerned that this regulation will not effectively protect the fundamental rights, especially for people belonging to minority groups. I think that, and I really believe that, to prevent discriminatory outcomes of any AI systems, to prevent the use of biased data, as Pauline mentioned before, everyone needs to be at the table where the decisions are made. I also believe that a conformity with AI standards cannot be left in the hands of certain people, of private companies, or of the people that are knowledgeable about these technologies. And again, we are in the early stage of this proposal, right? It's just for now a proposal, so I can't make a full assessment on it. But with doing my research and also seeing what other cities have shared on the regulation, I realized that it's important that also cities are being included into all this process of what happens next. And I think that's it. I don't want to. I don't know if it was long enough, but I don't want to talk too much. But I'm open to get the questions in the Q&A session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jana. I think it's really interesting to be able to talk about different applications, because of course, you know, what I mentioned before, facial recognition and predictive policing are these kind of, you know, super polarizing topics, but there are so many more use cases that are possible. And as you said, there is the question of administrative decision making, and if that is done, how can we ensure that we can see the link between the reason why a decision was taken the way it was taken. And you did mention that some cities in Belgium were already doing this, and I know that we have a few Belgians in the audience. So if they want to elaborate on that later on during the discussion session, I think that'd be really interesting to hear. And of course, there is, I think, this need to raise awareness on tech washing, on the importance to not just put existing biases into automated biases. So a very important discussion to have. And then I think when it comes to the, as you mentioned, when it comes to the regulatory framework that the Commission has published, this proposal, the need that cities are involved in this as well. I also do hope that maybe this can be a place where some of the members of the audience can give their opinion about this proposal and whether it is easy or not to operationalize. So I think obviously one thing that keeps coming back is this fear that automated decision making, that algorithms represent a black box, and that there is a lack of transparency. And this is why I am very excited to hear from our next speaker, Linda, who will explain a little bit how the city of Amsterdam is both using algorithms and also putting into place instruments to enforce this transparency. So I give the floor to you, Linda, and you can share your screen as well.
Yeah, thanks, Pauline, for the invitation. Also, thanks, Jana, for your great speech. I recognize a lot of it and agree with a lot of it, and I'll be trying to give some like extra perspectives on this issue with my presentation. So let me share my screen. Yeah, and let me check right away if the sound is also shared. It is. And give me one more second. Yes, here we are. Okay, so let me first of all say that this is encouraging also to see so many cities at least interested in this topic, right? Seeing all the people that are here today. Let me start with, oh, sorry, I still don't have control. Yeah, there we are. Let me start with giving a little bit of context. So Amsterdam is a city that believes in a people-centered approach to technology, and that didn't fall out of the sky, right? We have the political context for that. So we have a policy framework that's meant to provide democratic safeguards for citizens in the digital realm, called the Digital City Agenda. And we also work together with many cities from all over the world on implementing the protection of digital rights. For example, through the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. And now, of course, as we are living in 2021 and also the years before, AI and algorithms were already a big topic. It might be good to say that we started all of this, of course, way before this new regulation. So the regulation does solve a few things, maybe here and there, or at least will give more importance to public control on AI, but I do still think there's a lot to do to put it into practice, and that's what I'll elaborate on. But first, some examples. So Amsterdam uses more and more AI. For instance, for very run-of-the-mill city tasks like parking control, where, well, in this case, an ANPR camera scans license plates and checks in a national database to see if parking fees have been paid. So that's one example of how an algorithm is used in the city. Another example I've brought is the public eye algorithm. So we're developing actually several uses for computer vision and object detection. And in this public eye example or project, we use the real-time images from cameras in a few very busy places in Amsterdam to recognize how many people are in that place. And of course, this does not use facial recognition, but rather it recognizes something as a head. Still, there are many discussions to be had about the impact of this. Facial recognition has a lot of impact, but still recognizing someone as a person can already be very impactful, but we'll come to that. Resulting data from this algorithm is used, of course, by the municipality for public control, for, what's the word, crowd control, but it's also made available to the public so they can avoid busy places, which is, of course, extra important during the COVID crisis. And the last example I brought was that we also are experimenting with AI for more, let's say, risky or imposing tasks, like making sure fraud is being detected. In this example, an algorithm is used to prioritize notification that the municipality gets about people renting out their houses for more than the maximum allowed 30 days in Amsterdam. So for instance, through a site like Airbnb. And when the municipality gets such a notification from, say, a neighbor, an algorithm first checks the likelihood of the notification being credible by checking previous violations and other similar data. And the most credible notifications go on top of the pile, and that helps the enforcer's workload to well, stay down. So these are just 3 examples of how we use algorithms in the city, and of course, as you can understand, they can be quite impactful, especially if not handled well. Now, I assume, especially since the first 2 talks, that you already all know that algorithms and AI can be a bit of a black box, right? So not many people understand how they actually work, and even if you do understand, it's only a handful of people who do. And for democratic government, that is a problem. For us, it's essential, and in the Netherlands even law, that we can explain on what grounds a certain decision on a citizen has been made. And that's not important just because it is a law, but frankly, I think it's the only way you can expect citizens to trust us as a government. Now, over the recent years, there actually has been quite some substantial work done on many legislative levels to give us guidelines on how one should provide transparency and safeguard human rights. And there's this wonderful overview study by the Berkman Klein Institute of Harvard, which I really recommend, that has collected all these guidelines. But for us, probably the most important guidelines were the ones by the high-level expert group on AI of the European Commission, of which now the regulatory framework is built. However, what these guidelines and all the other guidelines were missing was that they were not yet operationalized, and therefore they were not easy to implement. And for a city government who has to deal with AI in practice, it's not enough to say, for instance, that AI should be transparent, because, okay, of course, everyone agrees, but what is transparency? What information is specifically needed? And that's why we've developed several policy instruments, actually, for gaining what we call public control over AI. I've put some in this this overview, but I want to single out 2, which will be the most useful, I think, for you for this presentation. And those are also the 2 that are best documented for future reference. So let me just, I'm sorry, but the GoToMeeting is over some of my notes, so I have to switch the screen really quickly. Let me just check. Sorry, yeah, here we are again. And now back to the presentation. Yeah, so these are also the instruments that we've worked together on with the city of Helsinki, where we've tried to design them in such a way that other governments can easily reuse them. So that was an objective in the first place of these instruments. So first of all, there's the procurement conditions. And I wanted to show this text-heavy slide to give you an idea. These are real contractual terms and conditions that we've written. And these conditions were drafted not so much because we needed new procurement conditions per se, but because procurement conditions force you to be very specific about what you ask from your supplier. Because of course, in a contract, you need to be clear what it is that you need from this supplier. And of course, to get it right, we've been working together closely with legal experts and AI experts and also the suppliers. So I can dive into this very deeply, but for now, let me just highlight the most important thing that we did, and that was that we use these definitions to define what we meant by specific important words, such as algorithmic system, or such as the different types of transparency. And especially defining the different types of transparency and making explicit what information we need from a supplier, or for that matter, from our own in-house developers, to give explainability to citizens. That was really key to operationalizing these ethical AI guidelines, and was also the basis for the other instruments we made, such as the algorithmic register. So we require suppliers to provide information on the assumptions and choices that were made when developing the algorithm. So what type of data was used, what was the quality of the data that was used in the training, what bias detection methods were used, if there was any bias in the data, was it still used and why? All those types of questions are asked, and there's information demanded to be handed over to us by the suppliers. So yeah, let me just think. Yeah, let me leave it at that. Maybe there's some additional questions in a bit. So now I want to zoom in on our AI register, and let me just show you a quick clip to give you an overview, and then I'll elaborate a bit on it. I'll start the clip.
Introducing the world's first algorithm and artificial intelligence register.
Oh, sorry.
Algorithms and artificial intelligence have become an integral part of our lives. Governments use these tools to improve the accessibility and experience of their services and our public spaces. However, that means that citizens need to understand how algorithms work and how they affect their daily lives. That's why we have developed the Algorithm and AI Register. The register gives citizens the transparency they deserve. You can learn why and how algorithms are being used and who is affected, or dive into what data is being used, how it's processed, how discrimination is prevented, the degree of human oversight, and how risks are handled. Help us improve the register and make it the standard for transparency in algorithms and artificial intelligence.
So this is, of course, a quick overview. What is this AI register? And of course, I'll provide a link to it in a bit in the chat. For now, it's a website where you can visit and find information about the algorithms that we use in Amsterdam. Here you see the front page. And right now, there's only 5 algorithms in the register, or I think in the English version, it's even only 4. But in the future, of course, there will be many more. And for this presentation, I just wanted to give you a very quick overview. So I wanted to show you the register by highlighting the one thing I'm actually most proud of, and that's that that I believe that we found some kind of medium between, on the one hand, making it understandable for a general public, while on the other hand, not compromising too much on the level of transparency. Because it's always an issue, of course. You can just provide all the information you have, but then there's information overload, and it's still not really clear how an algorithm works. So we try to find a balance there. So you start at the homepage, where you can choose an algorithmic system, and note that we don't focus on the algorithm themselves, or at least we don't structure the information around the algorithm themselves, but rather on the process or the city task in which they are used. So for instance, we focus on parking control instead of on the ANPR algorithm that is used in parking control. And then when you click on one of these topics, you first see the first layer of information. which is general information for people without any technical backgrounds, explaining the process of which the algorithm is part, and also, of course, in general terms, what the algorithm does, what impact there is on you as a civilian, what risks are involved, and the way we mitigate those risks. So that's just in that first column of text. And of course, then there's contact information, which is quite important, I believe, for the accountability of the government. But then, if you want, you can scroll down and dive deeper into the technical details. For instance, the source code or the datasets, if they are available under GDPR. And those functions are aimed more at people like journalists, academics, civil society organizations, or politicians. So people that really want to know what the municipality is up to. Oh, and I provided this example. So within the information about the model, we always try to provide a flowchart of the kind of the steps that the algorithm takes, but also, is it an automated step, or is it a city servant, a civil servant who is making that step or making that decision, or is it maybe a step or an activity that the citizen does themselves? So that's the blue box in this case. So this is, of course, a very fast sneak peek. I encourage you to visit the register yourself, either the Amsterdam register or the Helsinki register. For those interested in starting your own register, or of course reading up on the intentions and the background of the register, we also have written a white paper. So I'll provide some links in the chat to that white paper, to the register, and also to the procurement conditions, which are available for use and reuse. That's it for now. Thanks. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Perfect. Thank you, Linda. That was very interesting, because it's true that we so often mention the conditions, the requirements. They have come back now, of course, with the proposal for a regulatory framework, and very often the question of how to operationalize it kind of stays in the dark. So I think this is a very concrete example of that. I wanted to also come back very quickly to like one of the first things that you said, and which goes back to something that Jana said, that when she was doing some research on perceptions about this in Luxembourg, there wasn't much happening, and how important political buy-in is, of course, in putting into place these kind of instruments. One other thing that I also would like to point out a little more is the fact that you said that this format of the AI register, this website, is in your opinion quite a good balance between ensuring transparency and not giving an information overload. And I think that's another really important aspect of making a requirement such as transparency and communication with the user operational, that is to have the right interface and to make sure that the Lambda citizen, as Jana mentioned, as Jana described it, has the ability to understand to understand how the technology works and what safeguards are in place. All right.
Yeah,
so
if I may add,
yeah.
There's also a big risk to that, because it does have the risk of becoming just yet another government communication tool, right? And if the government using this register isn't absolutely convinced that they need to provide transparency, then they will just use it to give you the idea that everything is very much under control. So it is a hard balance to find. When are you providing information that is actually helpful, and when are you just providing the information that you want to put out there? It's hard to strike the balance.
Have to be careful not to like tech wash to tech washing. So,
exactly.
Okay, let me. I will end the registration. The recording now for the discussion session.